Whee! 2022 was a year. I don't really know how else to put it, y'all. It was not a good time for me. Kind of needed that break from my mental health. The last few years have been taxing. I had a lot of trauma to unpack, much like the films I'll be talking about today. In the wake of all that, I'm gonna try a redo of what I said last year, and gonna be launching the Horror Pals 2.0 sort of podcast experience, which I'll be uploading the first 2 episodes of right on here when you see this. So you'll be getting 3 videos for the price of 1, and then hopefully a regular upload schedule going forward, featuring less of my face and more of my voice and more voices from friends and extensive discussion on movies in a more podcasty format. So, without further ado, let's wrap up 2022. Really good year for horror. The last few years have been some of the best in my 29-year existence. From excellent new prolific genre directors to a massive variety of different voices in the director's seats to a ton of wildly unique stories from all walks of life of considerable quality. It's been the best year for horror in my memory in a long time. We've gotten some brilliant films the last few years. And here's my list of standouts from 2022, many of them being tied together by unifying themes of trauma, an underlying theme that we've all been seeing a lot of in recent years. And I think that it's really fun to see people unpack that trauma in a variety of different ways, mostly through horror. What else is this genre for? We've all been forced to confront the notion of loneliness over the last few years, the need for human connection, and the notion of, overcoming our burdens or surrendering to them, and the horrors of surrendering to them if you do. Kicking off this list with the first of a few feminist horror pieces, Watcher, Chloe Okuno. Paranoia-fueled thriller that's methodically slow and effective, and I am obsessed with Chloe Okuno's work as of late. I loved her short in VHS 94, and her understanding for how to effectively implement slow, creeping cinematography to amp up this feeling of isolation really works to throw you into Julia's world, where she's utterly alone and increasingly frustrated when no one understands or believes her when she is trying to explain these increasingly disturbing gut feelings she's having. The more her gut feelings are waved off as paranoia, the more frustrating it is to watch, and it provides a really good insight for men who haven't ever had to experience something like this, and the fact that many women do have to face having their judgments questioned on the regular, only to be amplified in this film by the culture shock of being in a foreign country where no one speaks the same language as you.
What's going on?
I'm gonna tell you, but you're gonna freak out. Forget this.
Fresh, directed by Mimi Cave, horror black comedy about the risks of putting yourself out there in the dating scene as a woman, putting yourself in vulnerable situations with people you don't truly know. It's hard to know somebody who you meet through an app, and it's hard to get to know somebody in a dating culture that has essentially commodified dating. It is incredibly dangerous to be putting yourself out there in certain ways. And this is a film that shocked me, not only because of the incredible 33-minute cold open that lulls you into such a false sense of security with incredible chemistry from Daisy Edgar-Jones and Sebastian Stan, only to pull the rug out from under you with a great title card drop, but because Mimi Cave seamlessly balances the utterly disturbing cannibal content with really stylish poppy editing and really glamorous presentation and some excellent comedic timing in terms of black comedy, romance, dick mangling, shocking twist on eating ass. Fresh is a really good time. It's on Hulu. Check it out.
One drink.
Run, Sweetheart, Run. This one might surprise some people being on this list, but I don't know. I kind of loved it. Directed by Shauna Feist, Run, Sweetheart, Run doesn't tell the most original story. A woman is attacked after a dinner date with a client, has to outwit and overcome her attacker who is pursuing her throughout the night. Thematically, it's tackling the traumas that are just inflicted on women broadly in terms of power dynamics, and the way that patriarchal society enables those things It's a theme that's tackled similarly in Don't Worry, Darling, ironically dropping before this movie, even though this movie was supposed to come out before the pandemic. What Don't Worry, Darling, which I find interesting that it even has a similar title, failed to explore in any meaningful way, Run, Sweetheart, Run takes some interesting directions with. Its use of fourth wall breaks almost make you, the viewer, complicit in the narrative that's unfolding, and it's about as subtle with its themes as a pickaxe to the skull, with some really incredibly on-the-nose dialogue that for some people might be a little heavy-handedness. Never hurt anyone, though, at least in my case. I do think Ella Balinska makes a fantastic Survivor girl, and I think Pilu Asbake brings such an insane, delightfully scenery-chewing performance that it's just worth a watch for just the entertainment value of it all. Shauna Feist brings such a stylish flair to this, and I'm really curious to see what she does next, because I had fun with this despite how awkwardly it's written and in your face it is with its themes at times. I don't know, it's a good time. Hellbender, directed by directed by Zelda Adams, John Adams, and Toby Poser. Indie horror at its most indie. Hellbender is this DIY family affair directed by a trio of a daughter and her parents. Hellbender tells a unique story of oppressive matriarchal households and explores the notion of generational trauma with this really low-budget garage metal flair. Just the fact this movie was made by a family at their house during quarantine on such a low budget, only to go to Shudder and blow the hell up and be featured on The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob, that makes me so happy. The world of indie filmmaking has been just on fire lately, and I can't wait to talk about it with you all. Mad God, directed by Phil Tippett. It's a film that I cannot quite say I enjoyed. I don't think I liked this movie, but it is a masterclass in passionate filmmaking, and for that, on that metric alone, I think it's worth a watch. It's a nihilistic, miserable experience, but it's breathtakingly hand animated over the span of like 33 years. He's been making this movie for 3 decades, and that feat makes it worth a watch. It is on Shudder. It is worth seeing. It's beautifully animated. It is grotesque to look at, and it does offer a lot to think about and a lot to chew on. And I think a lot of people are going to walk away from it with different takes, and more power to you if you enjoy it. Like I said, I do respect this movie. I think it's a brilliant artistic piece. I am not down with misery porn for like hour and a half. That being said, I would still recommend watching it.
What happened?
Nothing. I just feel a bit off.
The dark reflection of all the dealing with your trauma movies, Andrew Siman's Resurrection, starring masterclass Rebecca Hall, shows the horrific result of not dealing with your trauma and not going to therapy. It's a wild slow burn. It has a horrific payoff. Resurrection is a bit predictable and a bit traumatic for anyone who grew up around, this type of behavior, and it does go to some wildly relatable places to some people who have dealt with abusive or oppressive mothers. But the balls-to-the-wall climax of it, and the fact that it just gives you 2 excellent performances from Tim Roth and Rebecca Hall, this movie is a wild ride, and if you haven't seen it, you should. It's on Shudder. Give it a watch.
It doesn't work. Hang it up.
The reunion of writer-director duo Cargill and Scott Derrickson. The Black Phone adapts the Joe Hill novella and tells the story of a young boy abducted by a mysterious child murderer known as the Grabber, and he finds himself contacted by the spirits of the murderer's previous victims on the seemingly non-working phone in the basement he's being kept in. The Grabber is played excellently by Ethan Hawke, and shrouded in a lot of mystery, which I know some people had an issue with. I personally loved that. I felt that we didn't really need a sympathetic backstory for this character. It's actually more effective with him just being mysterious, and there are pieces given to you about him that you can put together a backstory for him, but I prefer the way the movie handled it in not revealing it and leaving it up to the audience. What really surprised me about this movie is its shockingly deep message about self-advocacy and this meaningful brother-sister relationship between Finney and Gwen. And that's what earned this movie a spot on the list, the emotional heart of it. I was not expecting it. It's very, very good. Hatching, directed by Hannah Bergholm. Coming from Finland, Hatching is another film that deals with the way parents project their trauma and their baggage onto their kids and try to mold their kids into what they want them to be and not really pay attention to what the kids want to do. It's a beautiful creature feature with some stunning practical effects work and a heartbreaking story at its core. As I've said in my Letterboxd review, I would die for Allie in her base form, which is this weird bird raptor done entirely practically. It's stunning to look at. The less I say about it, the better, so I'll leave it at this. Look at the big egg. You like the big egg. Kiss the big egg.
I'm just really scared that something bad is going to happen. Rose.
Based on his short film, Laura Hasn't Slept, Smile is probably the most surprising entry on this list for me. I didn't expect to be hyping it up the way I did. It didn't do much for me with its advertising. I was shocked by how effectively creepy it was at times, both in terms of its visuals and shockingly freaky sound design. This movie gave us a dope monster design, and it really managed to do enough to elevate itself from a typical run-of-the-mill horror movie, even if its story is particularly derivative of other better films.
这便是祝福的原理。
Incantation, directed by Kevin Ko. Taiwan's answer to the other terrifying Asian docu-horrors like Japan's Noroi and Thailand's The Medium. Incantation is probably one of the scariest films on this list. It is on Netflix, and if you want to give yourself large goose pimples, check it out with all the lights off and don't look away. Uniquely terrifying, uses unreliable narration and documentary framing and a non-linear story to basically demolish the fourth wall between audience and participant, and it assaults you with viscerally terrifying visuals and concept that had me like wanting to cover my eyes at points. That being said, trypophobia victims, beware. There are some things in this movie that will make you want to crawl out of your skin.
I don't want to be remembered as a douchebag!
Deadstream, directed by Joseph and Vanessa Winter. One of my favorite Shudder exclusives of the year. Deadstream thrusts an obnoxious douchebag live streamer into a haunted house with hilarious splatstick results. One of the funniest horror comedies I've seen in a very long time. Essentially a found footage Evil Dead. I loved this movie. It is insane and funny and over the top with gore and violence and so many laughs. I've talked about it enough in my review, so I'm not going to really waste any more time on this one. Give it a watch.
We have ourselves a winner!
Not quite reaching the hilarity or insanity of VHS 94. VHS 99 delivers consistency most of all, really hamming up the end of the 90s aesthetic with everything being loud and in your face and obnoxious. It really leans into the comedy this time around, and I did appreciate that. Ton of gore, crazy monsters, all the zany antics watching obnoxious 90s kids get murdered by ghost punk bands. Come for the dope song by Bitch Cat, stay for Mabel the Skullbiter. It is worth a watch, and I did enjoy it.
I'll be right back.
He's dead.
Scream, directed by Matt Olpin and Tyler Gillette. 2022 was big for franchise horror as well, both new and legacy. We kicked off with the fifth Scream film. That was the first movie of the year. First without Wes Craven involved. And it does his legacy justice, if you ask me. The members of Radio Silence responsible for bringing us this, they clearly have a deep love for this franchise and a passion for horror and especially for Ghostface. This really hit home as I think probably my second favorite Scream franchise. It really has tackled the way that horror has evolved and horror fandom has evolved in such a way that has become incredibly toxic.
How can fandom be toxic? It's about love.
It has me stoked for what's to come with Scream 6. And I mean, there's never been a bad Scream movie, but I do think this is my favorite after the original. Halloween Ends, directed by David Gordon Green. Perhaps the most controversial slot on this list. Like I said, this is not a best of the year list. This is a movies you should watch list. I'm fascinated by its existence. I have no real love for David Gordon Green's Halloween trilogy. I've been very open about that. But Halloween Ends sort of exists in my mind as this Schrodinger's cat of a movie, where my appreciation of it depends entirely on how I view it as a film. In a vacuum, divorced from like the films that came before it, it's really interesting. It's exploring some really fascinating ideas with the notion of like existing in this well of never overcoming your trauma or finally making the decision to face it head on and kill it. Taking the characters in the Halloween franchise and forcing them to face or overcome their trauma of Michael Myers, there's some really interesting stuff here. And if you remove Halloween Kills from the equation altogether and have Halloween Ends follow Halloween 2018, the two films pair really well with what they're saying, but then you throw Halloween Kills in the middle and it just fucks everything up. I still stand by my statement, though, that there's a brilliant fan edit in there somewhere. Halloween Kills really did just feel like an unnecessary movie compiled from extended footage from the first film anyway. All in all, I'm really just putting this one in here because it's genuinely different and genuinely an interesting direction to take Halloween in. And Jamie Lee Curtis and Rowan Campbell both brought their A-game here, and it just really, the biggest issue is that it fell flat as the conclusion of a trilogy.
Full screen.
Hellraiser, directed by David Bruckner, the best revival of the year in my opinion. Hellraiser 2022 is among my favorite horror films of the year, period. David Bruckner made a name for himself tackling cosmic existential horror that preys on trauma, and Hellraiser just felt like the natural evolution of that. It felt like a perfect fit for him. This is more of a retelling of Hellbound Hellraiser 2 than Hellraiser the original, but this really explores Clive Barker's Hell with updated and expanded lore in a way that captures the cosmic horror of it so much better than anything we've seen before. We get some breathtaking new Cenobite designs fronted by Jamie Clayton's Hellpriest in perhaps the best new actor stepping into a role maybe ever. And stunning cinematography that really make Hell feel otherworldly and wrong and weird. It's a bleak story about the consequences of pleasure-seeking and regret, and I hope we get to see more of the sights and sensations that David Bruckner's Hell offers in the future, because I loved this movie so much. I want to see more of this world.
All the way from Miles County, please welcome Art the Clown!
Terrifier 2. You didn't think you'd be getting through this list without a shout out to one of the coolest horror blow-ups of the year, did you? I was lukewarm on the first Terrifier. I thought it was fun, but outside of the gore and a fantastic performance by David Howard Thornton, I didn't think it was really offering all that much. And then Terrifier 2 said hold my beer and gave us the most insane, over-the-top gore, gonzo violence, threw in more Art the Clown, gave us a weird little demon girl as a sidekick for him, and then threw in a boatload of lore and world building, complete with a magic sword and a girl whose destiny it is to fight and kill a demon clown. This became a slasher epic, the likes of which I never expected from a franchise where the first film had arguably no plot. Star-making performance from Lauren Lavera, a terrifying addition to the cast in Amelie McLean, who plays the little demon clown girl, and the fact that this movie went on to gross $8 million on a budget of like $250,000. There's so much promise for the third film here. I can't wait to see what Leone does next, because if any of the shit he's setting up here is delivered on, this will be maybe one of the best horror slasher franchises in a very long time. Barbarian, directed by Zach Kreger of The Whitest Kids You Know. Perhaps the most unhinged movie of the year. Barbarian's 2022's Malignant, in my opinion. I do mean that as a compliment. There's a world of things that can be said about this movie, from all of the themes it's trying to tackle, and generational, like, trauma in a very different way, speaking from, like, a class perspective. But the biggest compliment I could pay this movie is how utterly unpredictable it is. I cannot tell you the last time I saw a film where I had no clue where it was going. And I had no idea where this movie is going because of the hard left turn it takes at around the 45-minute mark, turning into an entirely different film and leaving you wondering for like a solid 30 minutes what the fuck is going on. But the first act of this movie is really where it shines. I mean, from frame one, Kreger uses some really great production design and really fantastic cinematography to create maybe the most palpable air of tension I've seen in a horror film before. I felt like I was holding my breath for a good majority of it, because you think for the entire duration of that opening that you know where it's going, and you're wrong every time. It puts you on the edge of your seat in the worst way. Only to pull a psycho and then shift gears dramatically, taking you on a darkly hilarious, head-scratching journey of what the fuck that reaches new levels of disturbing depravity every time you think it's done. And it really is just a story about, you know, not judging a book by its cover. Nope, directed by Jordan Peele. First of all, I was absolutely right. It was a big eyeball. I am vindicated. Moving on. Jordan Peele's best feature, in my opinion, and I do really mean that, Nope manages to be a sci-fi horror blockbuster epic in the vein of like Steven Spielberg's Jaws. It's beautifully shot, incredibly acted, and I think Keke Palmer is the biggest standout in my opinion. And there are several points in this movie that are genuinely nightmarish, from the Gordy scene to the eyeball esophagus, let's call it. This manages to be Peele's film with the most to say, and the way that the movie addresses those messages is brilliant, in my opinion, in the way that every single element, every single visual always ties back to that theme in the same way, casting blame at people who are hungering for spectacle, and then also pointing fingers at the systems that profit off of it. It's all tackled through the lens of big floating eyeball camera that eats people and screams. And there's just so much to unpack there, and maybe in Horror Pals 2.0, I'll do a big Jordan Peele episode and go into it in depth.
Hey guys, Casey here. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be taking the World's Fair Challenge.
We're all going to the World's Fair, directed by Jane Schoenbrunn, a film that I talked about last year, actually, when it was in the festival circuit, but also got to talk to Jane about earlier this year. World's Fair makes it on this list now that it's available to everybody to watch. It's on HBO Max. And it's Jane's debut feature film, taking an intimate story about a lonely girl who finds solace in an online alternate reality game, and the dangers of that come from both internal and externally, with the dangers of very easily losing yourself in that world if you don't really have a support system to rely on, and also the dangers of predatory people in that world who take advantage of people who don't have a support system to rely on. It explores the nature of parasocial relationships through the internet, and Jane created a film that really does capture, in my opinion, the vibes of existing in niche internet circles, the simultaneous feeling of comfort and loneliness and isolation, all melded together in this lo-fi indie film that is just as much a coming-of-age story as it is a horror movie. It's got a beautiful score, and it really, in a way, it is about self-expression, and it's just about the dangers that come along with the openness to express yourself on the internet.
If we're going to try to prove the supernatural, we're going to need some kind of visuals.
Something in the Dirt, directed by Aaron Moorhead and Justin Benson. Perhaps the best film from these two. Something in the Dirt is a film that literally just is dedicated to making movies with your friends in the end credits, something that resonates with me deeply. I love these guys, you know that. I've talked about all their films, I've raved about all their films. The Endless is one of my favorite movies by them, and I really do think that Something in the Dirt is perhaps their best because it's so different and so unique, and it's made purely from passion over the span of quarantine, where it was just Aaron and Justin and Dave and camera equipment. This is a movie that's both expansive and also very intimate. It ties into their crazy, weird universe while also keeping it very isolated to these two guys, exploring the notion of these two, misanthropic people who find purpose. The insane places that relationship takes them to in all of its toxicity and conspiratorial nonsense. It's about the need for human connection and the notion of human loneliness and how truly maddening that can be, and especially if you are someone who needs to find meaning in it all. It's wrapped up in a quasi-documentary framing that really makes use of unreliable narration to make you question several times what kind of movie you're even watching, and the way that it reveals information to you up until the very last frame leaves you with so much to chew on after the fact, and I love this movie a lot. And the way that it explains aspects of their greater universe while also revealing nothing at all is maybe one of my favorite things. I love everything these guys do. I cannot wait to see more.
What do you think is on it?
I see one goddamn fucked up horror picture.
X and Pearl. My favorite experience of 2022 has been a duology, soon to be a trilogy once Maxine comes out, from genre director extraordinaire Ty West. X dropped back in March, talked about it on version 1 of the podcast. It opened to a ton of praise, delivered a twisted, gory, but also sexy and somewhat emotional slasher film starring Mia Goth twice, dealing with the notion of lost youth and aging and regret. X manages to, in spite of its subject matter and its grimy Texas Chainsaw Massacre feel, deliver a really poignant message about empowerment and self-worth and refusing to accept a life you don't deserve. A message that carries over then into its secretly filmed prequel film Pearl, also starring Mia Goth, highlighting these tragic similarities between Maxine and Pearl, two characters played by the same woman. Maxine essentially functioning as a mirror to Pearl and showing her everything that she could have had if she hadn't just chosen to stay on the farm with Harold, which is something that is entirely her choice. There's nothing stopping her. She stayed behind out of a crippling need to feel loved, something that a lot of people can relate to. And the way that it explores these themes, I have a very strong idea of where I want Maxine to go. I hope it goes there because this could be one of the best horror trilogies ever. And I'm really excited to see this final film. I can't believe in the year of our Lord 2022, we got 2 films from the same director, who is now in the process of making the third to complete his vision of a trilogy. We're getting an original horror trilogy from the same director in the span of 2 years, and I am elated by that fact. All of these movies are available streaming somewhere, and if you want to see any of them, or if you haven't seen any of them, check them out. If you have seen them all, sound off below, let me know what you thought. Like I said, this is a movies you should watch. This is just films that I would recommend. These are the standouts of the year for me, whether they be good, bad, or somewhere in between. These are movies that I think are worthy of a shout out, worthy of a mention, worthy of attention. Looking forward to you guys seeing what we've got cooking for the new Horror Pals. I will see y'all soon. I'll be releasing this along with those 2. I'll see y'all in February.